Okay, today's Dal Kislev. So the topic is obviously the Rebbe's anniversary. The Rebbe and Rebbetzin Chayim wedding anniversary. I'm hoping next week I'll be able to do Yutas Kislev. It'll be after Yutas Kislev, but that's the way it goes. Today we'll do Dal Kislev, and next week we'll do Yutas Kislev. Post facto, in anticipation of the Hanukkah vacation. How do I tell the story of the Rebbe and the Rebbetz's wedding? Right? Once upon a time, there was a Rebbe and there was a Rebbetzin, and they got married. That's the story. I suppose the beginning of the story goes back a few generations. Tzemach Tzedek was a great Rebbe. The third Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose name the Rebbe had. The Rebbe's father, Reb Eli always used to write to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin that the two of you have the same name as the two of them. He writes to his father, Rebbe Leivik writes to his son, the Rebbe's son, our Rebbe, Sha'ata v'chaveroscha nikroim b'shmam shel tzemach tzedek v'chaveroscha. You and your friend, that's how he refers to her, carry the same name as the tzemach tzedek and his chevra, and his friend. The same name is Menachem Mendel and Chayim Mushka. So Tzedek was an incredibly great Rebbe. Unfortunately, there's an event that happened when he passed away that's... it's very unfortunate. From a historical point of view, when you look at it objectively now, you say, what a waste. It was a terrible, terrible waste. What happened was that Lubavitch was split. You know, like in every Chassidish movement today, you know, a Rebbe passes away, and then depending on how many children he has, that's how many new Rebbes there are. That's what happened. Tzemach Tzedek was nostalgic, and there were four Mamala Makayim, four successors. There were the fifth. But first of all, he became a Rebbe when Tzemach Tzedek was still alive. And second of all, he didn't become a Chabad Rebbe, he became a Polish Rebbe. He took on a whole different style. But the Tzemach Tzedek's Istalkus ushered in a division of Lubavitch, of Chabad, which would last more or less 50 years, maybe a little less. 50 years, from the 1860s until the First World War, approximately. There were four branches of Chabad. The largest branch was Kapust, not Lubavitch. The smallest branch was Lubavitch. The second largest branch was Liadi, the third largest branch was Nezhin, and the last was Lubavitch. In Nezhin, there was only one generation. The Nezhin Rebbe passed away, his name was Rebbe Nechem Nezhin. When he passed away, there was no successor. His son did not become a Rebbe after him. In fact, his son was the father of the Rebbe's in the Chamadina. The Friedrich Rebbe Shver was the son of the Nezhin Rebbe. But the other three were two generations, the son and the grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek. And the tzaris that the Jewish people encountered in Russia during this period were very bad. The only thing that you could say good about the tzaris that happened in the 1860s and the 1870s and the 1880s and the 1890s, that compared to the tzaris that would come the next generation, they paled and they were not a big deal. There's a lot of tzaris, and the split of Lubavitch didn't help. In other words, had Lubavitch remained unified, I mean, how could that have happened? If that would have happened, there would have been a different Eibishter and a different universe, and there's only one Eibishter, there's only one world, there's only one Teid, and there's only one Ratzon. What is what's supposed to be, whether we approve of it or not. But the fact was, Lubavitch was divided. And the result of the division was that each one of the four groups was weaker. You know, anytime you have an army, and you divide your forces into four, each quarter is weaker than they would be if they were joined with the other three. This is the risks you take when you divide your army, divide your forces. And that's what happened. The truth of the matter is, Lubavitch should have been divided into five. It should have been divided into five. Why five? Because there were five sons. Tzemach Tzedek had seven. One, I already told you, became a Polish Rebbe. This is our Friedrich Rebbe's mother's father. His name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok. The Friedrich Rebbe is named after him. One passed away before the Tzemach Tzedek. His name was Rabbi Yankiv. He was a Rav in Aral. We don't know much about him. He was a Choshev Erid, but he wasn't in the Madreg of the other brothers. Okay, four became Rebbes, and one didn't. Which one didn't become Rebbe? The one who was entitled to the position, the oldest. So the Baruch Shalom was a B'chor. He was the firstborn. And Al Pi Halacha, a B'chor is entitled to be Memala Mekayim Avesav if he's Roy. There's a din. If a king passes away, or a Kohen Gadol passes away, or anybody passes away, if his oldest son is Roy, he's Memala Mekayim. Ravash was entitled, the Baruch Shalom, that's our grandfather's grandfather, was entitled to be Memala Mekayim Aviv from a halachic perspective, and on and on and on. He was an Adam Gadol, he was Adam Kaddish. It's very interesting. Tzemach Tzedek had a lot of trouble in his own house. Why? He became a Rebbe. One of his children was still a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. Another one of his children remained a chassid of the Middle Rebbe. That's how it was. The Ravash knew the Alter Rebbe. He was 7 when the Alter Rebbe passed away. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says his entire life he was sad. His entire life he was sad. Because he never got over the loss of his great-grandfather. The Alter Rebbe was very, very close to his great-grandson, Ravash. He taught him things that he didn't teach anybody else. And he had a very special relationship with him. The Ravash was there, but the Alter Rebbe's Petira. Ravash was one of the few people involved in the Alter Rebbe's... Remember, the Alter Rebbe was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Hadich. The Mishpacha was in Piene. The Alter Rebbe's Levaya probably didn't even have a minyan. It was done away. They took the Alter Rebbe's Guf Kaddish. 3 people went. The Tzemach Tzedek, and Reb Nochem, and the Ravash. Nochem was Tzemach Tzedek's brother-in-law, and the Rebbe Rasham. The Middle Rebbe wasn't around. The Middle Rebbe had gone away, as I told you the story the other day. So Ravash was the oldest. And he was very connected still to the Alter Rebbe. He was entitled to be B'Malam Makayim Aviv, and he wasn't. I'll get back to him in a moment. And the Ma'aril, Yehuda Leib, he was the second. He was a chassid of the Middle Rebbe's. For 15 years after the Middle Rebbe passed away, he remained a chassid of the Middle Rebbe's until something happened and he saw his father's Mesiras Nefesh. So he became a chassid of his own father. I told you the story. I think I told you the story. Tzemach Tzedek came back from Peterburg. He said, you have to make a special dinner. I brought a new chassid from Peterburg. Who was the chassid? His own son, after 15 years. Now the Ravash should have been a Rebbe. Why wasn't he? Because the Tzemach Tzedek asked him not to. Tzemach Tzedek made his Mamal Mokum his youngest son. Tzemach Tzedek made his successor the Rebbe Marash. He wrote a tzavor. And this made people crazy, because the Rebbe Marash was so much younger than his brothers. The Rebbe Marash has nephews and nieces older than him. Many. He was a young man, he was 32 years old. His brothers were in their 50s and 60s. And the Tzemach Tzedek wrote in his tzavor that the Marash was Malam Makayim. And there was all kinds of stuff. There was what they call politics. I've never heard of politics. I mean, we don't know what that means, but in the olden days, they used to have politics. And the Marash became a Rebbe in Lubavitch, and he had the smallest Eilam, the smallest crowd. Unfortunately. The Ravash was entitled to be a Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek said to him, don't be a Rebbe. Please, I'm asking, don't be a Rebbe. And then he added some cryptic words, some riddle, some hint. He said, if you're not going to be a Rebbe, you'll get Pishnayim Beruch. The halacha is that a firstborn gets Pishnayim, gets double, or you divide, a man passes away. And he leaves 5 children, 5 sons, yeah? You divide the estate into 6 parts, not into 5 parts. And the Bechor gets 2 parts. Pishnayim Bechor L'Shei Motzei Lei. So Tzemach Tzedek told the Ravash, if you're not going to take Rabbist for now, you'll get your Pishnayim. You'll get your double. But you're going to have to wait 4 generations. He quoted a pasuk in Pashas Lech Lecha, V'dei Revi Yeshuvu Heinin. 4 generations that will come back to you. So what happened was, Tzemach Tzedek passes away. The Lubavitch was divided up into 4, but those generations only lasted 2 doiris. One of them was 4 Rebbes, but 3 of them were brothers. Only 2 generations. And the only thing that was left was Lubavitch. There was the Rebbe Marash, there was the Rebbe Rashab, and there was the Frierdiker Rebbe. The grandchildren of the Ravash knew this. Reb Leivik, the Rebbe's father and his grandfather, knew this Messiah was passed along in their family from generation to generation, that in 4 generations it come back to them and they're going to get double. The day Revi'u in the 4th generation it'll come back to you. So the Shmua is, there's a lot of things that people say that are hard to prove and ascertain. And then there's some things that people say that are a little bit uncomfortable. Reb Leivik felt he should be a Rebbe. Why? He was the 4th generation from Tzemach Tzedek. Reb Baruch Shalom, Levi Yitzchak, Reb Baruch Shneir, and then Reb Leivik. When that didn't happen, the Levi did not become a Rebbe because the Chassidim didn't follow him. They followed the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe became a Chassan, some Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Reb Leivik said he made a mistake. That when the Tzemach Tzedek said 4 generations, he didn't mean 4 generations from the Tzemach Tzedek. He meant 4 generations from the Ravash. Reb Levi Yitzchak, Baruch Shneir, Reb Levi Yitzchak, and then the Rebbe. And Reb Leivik, this is a fact, always talked about his son as the next Rebbe. And Chassidim wanted to lynch him. Because every Chassid believes his Rebbe is Mashiach. A Rebbe lives forever. And Reb Leivik would say, Pemale! Ich bin am Bechutner von der Babitschen Rebbe, am der Bechutner der Rebbe, und mein Sohn wird sein, dem kommenden Rebbe, my son is the next Rebbe, and it was bad. Reb Leivik was not afraid of anybody, and he said exactly what he thought. And many Anash had that experience where they would meet him and he would tell them straight, "Ich bin the Mechutten, and my son is next." Go ahead.
I always heard this, I don't know, maybe it's not from a true source, that the Rebbe's father is very opposed to him.
I don't know if very opposed is the right word. There were complications in the Shidduch. I'm going to maybe get to it a little bit. Nobody knows for sure, or nobody wants to say for sure. I've heard some very interesting things, some of which I'm comfortable repeating, and some of which I'm not comfortable repeating. But yeah, there was something. It wasn't Pashut. The rumor is, this apparently is the truth, is that Rebbe Leivik knew that they would not have children. But there's more pratim, there's more details, which are a little bit harder to understand, which I'm not going to repeat. I'm just not repeating it. I've heard more rumors than I'm prepared to share. So that's the beginning of the story. In the family of the Rebbe's father, there was this knowledge that the Rebbe is going to come from them after 4 generations. Now, fast forward. The Rebbe was born, Yud Aleph Nisan Tov Reish Samach Beis, right? Our Rebbe was born the 11th day of this year, 1902. This was the golden age of Lubavitch. Why? The other Hasidus now began to wane. Kappas was not what it was. Liadi was still very strong. Nezhin was already over. And Lubavitch had this huge resurgence. And how many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Yisrael Nech? There's Aedis for Nezhin Echsidim. How many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Chaim Shnei Zalman? And there's Aedis for Liadi Echsidim. How many Lubavitcher boys carried the name Yehuda Leib? There's Aedis for Kappas Techsidim. In other words, when the Rebbe Rashab made Tem Chetmimim, everything went down into the same drain. All the other Chabadniks, there was take division with politic of idiots they weren't. They sent their children to learn on Lubavitch. And Tem Chetmimim brought the Tzemach Tzedek's Lubavitch back together, whatever was left of it. There was a lot of tzaras and a lot of halamas v'esteinim, but nevertheless, Tem Chetmimim brought it back together, brought back the Chavila, the Tzroir, the pekel, the package of Lubavitch back together. The Rebbe was born Tafresh Samach Beis. If the Rebbe had come to Tem Chetmimim as a 12-year-old, he would have been ahead of anybody else. As a 13-year-old, the Rebbe was never in Lubavitch. He never stepped foot in the city of Lubavitch. Ad Kedei Kach, I heard this from Rabbi Groner, myself. I think I have a tape of it. That when the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe asked they should make him a stationary. The Rebbe used to use the stationery of the different moistus, Machen, Americans, and Kos. Used the station the feed the Rebbe gave him. But the morning after, Yud Shvat was Wednesday night. Thursday morning, the Rebbe comes into the 770, and with a smile says, "Nu, Daftach Machen Anayim Blank, if they make a new stationery." So they told the Rebbe, "What do you want on the stationery?" The Rebbe says, "You'll prepare it and I'll fix it." So what did they do? They took the Frierdiker Rebbe stationery and they changed the name. Grand Rabbi, Ein Kleinigkeit. But by the time the Rebbe was done with it, there was nothing left of the original. And one of the things was, the Rebbe said, you can't put the word Lubavitch on it. And can you imagine a Lubavitcher Rebbe doesn't put in the stationery the word Lubavitch? And the Maskirim were really disturbed. So in the beginning, the Pshara was, it didn't say Mi Lubavitch, it said Lubavitch. Not from Lubavitch, but the word Lubavitch was left on the stationery. The Rebbe station doesn't even say Rebbe, it just says his name. So this is his name. Then the Rebbe made them do all the work, and then he undid everything that they did. The Rebbe's name and the phone number and the address of 770 Mergonisht. The Rebbe wanted to take out the word Lubavitch. He said, I heard this from Rabbi Groner myself, ich became Lubavitch. So he said, but how could you have a Lubavitcher Rebbe? It was not a Lubavitcher. So they put the word Lubavitch back, they just took out the Bim. It was not me Lubavitch. And the question becomes, why didn't the Rebbe go to Lubavitch? It doesn't make any sense. He was 18 years old when the Rebbe Rashab passed away. 18. The Rebbe's father said about the Rebbe to Rebbe Tzanchana, who repeated it, Zu bar mitzvah is a given a goan oilum. The Rebbe at bar mitzvah was a goan oilum. So at 18 years old, the Rebbe had a lot to take from the Rebbe Rashab, had a lot to get from Lubavitch. And he never was in Lubavitch. So there's a sefer called Yemei Melech. The Yemei Melech is a book of stories that could have happened. That's the way it's labeled nowadays. It's not the book that happened, but could have happened. There are many, many stories of the Rebbe. Every single story in the Yemei Melech has a source. The problem is how reliable the sources are. It came out around 30 years ago. It came out before Chav Zayin Oder. I read it cover to cover. I ate it up. It's an Amoid in the Kislev. So there's a story in the Sefer Yimei Melech that somebody asked the Rebbe's mother. All three boys were geniuses, all three of them. Mendel Better Label, Mebel, Mem Beis Lamed. Mebel means furniture, Sheina Mebel. Mendel Better Label, they were all geniuses. None of them saw the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe was the oldest. So they said to Rebbetzin Chane, they're such gifted children, you don't send them to Lubavitch. So the Rebbetzin Chane said, he's tearing to go, he's desperate to go, they're not letting him. Now who's they? Who's not letting the Rebbe go to Lubavitch? Malach Machol, Malach Gavriel, the Samach Mem. Who's stopping what? The Kaiser, the King, the Tsar, Nikolai. Who's stopping the Rebbe from going to Lubavitch? There's only one of two possibilities. The Rebbe Rashab himself, or the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father was Chosid numero uno of the Rebbe Rashab. The Dveikas, the Iskashas from the Rebbe Levik and the Rebbe Rashab is famous. The Rebbe spoke about it. So why would the Rebbe not be allowed to go to Lubavitch? Why? Now, nobody knows the answer to that question. But there is a precedent for this. The Alter Rebbe was 15 when the Baal Shem Tov passed away. His father was a chassid, his mother was a chassid, his grandfather was a chassid, his uncle was a chassid, his aunt was a chassid, his teachers were chassidim. And they were all sworn to secrecy. Not only were they not allowed to talk about the Baal Shem Tov, they were not allowed to say the word Baal Shem in the Alter Rebbe's presence. Alter Rebbe never heard the name Baal Shem Tov. Never. He was 15. Shabbos Talkus was a couple months before his chasana. The Alter Rebbe never heard the name Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. As the 3-year-old, the Baal Shem Tov gave him a haircut, and they dreid him a cup until they told him it is Azeda. But the Alter Rebbe was prevented from being the Baal Shem Tov. And the Previous Rebbe tells the story in his Rishimis that the Baal Shem Tov called in the Mezitcher Magid. And he said to the Mezitcher Magid, you should know that there's a Neshama Chadash on this world, there's a new soul on this world. And he told him the whole story about how this Neshama Chadash, Alter Rebbe was called the Neshama Chadash, came down into this world, the Gan Tzarichas, and he said to him the following. The Baal Shem Tov said to the Mezitcher Magid, quote, Ich hab gehat Mesiras Nefesh, soll mich nicht kennen. I had Mesiras Nefesh that he shouldn't know me. Is deiner. He's yours. The Baal Shem Tov told us to the Magid about the Alter Rebbe. Aber du wirst davon warten, soll kommen von sich allein. You can't go look for him. He has to come on his own. And the Alter Rebbe came, the Alter Rebbe left, and he forgot a shmata, he went back for a shmata, so he had to come back into the Beis Medrash a second time, and then he decided to stay. So this is the hasbara that people, nobody wants to say it official, because no one knows for sure, but the fact that the Rebbe did not meet the Rebbe Rashab is really odd. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The Rebbe was prevented from saying the Rebbe Rashab. There was a chassid who lived here in America, who was a very big chassid, a very great chassid. His name was Rebbe Shmuel Levitin. He was known stam as Rebbe Shmuel. He was a very big chassid. Rebbe Shmuel Levitin once walked, he as chassidim go, he was the closest thing to the Rebbe. The Rebbe chatted with him. The Rebbe didn't chat with anybody. The Rebbe didn't schmooze with anybody. The Friedrich Rebbe used to schmooze with people. The Rebbe didn't really sit around and schmooze. I mean, maybe they say Chadakov, Yaman Gardetsky. The Rebbe was not a kind of guy, kind of a Rebbe who engaged with his chassidim on a personal level. Rebbe Shmuel was to a very great extent the exception. Rebbe Shmuel walked out of the Rebbe's room shaking. They saw he was very upset. And they said to Rebbe Shmuel, what did the Rebbe say that's so upsetting? He says, the Rebbe just told me that he's happy he never saw the Rashab. Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch. The Rebbe once told somebody, Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch listening to the Rebbe Rashab say Chassidus before I was born, the Rebbe once said. Rebbe Shmuel was an old Chassid. And Rebbe Shmuel was in Lubavitch. And Rebbe Shmuel couldn't believe that the Rebbe would make such a statement, that he's happy he didn't meet the Rebbe Rashab. And he explained why. If I had met the Rebbe Rashab, it would have disturbed my bond, my connection to the Friedrich Rebbe, to the Rebbe Tishrei, to the Rebbe's Rebbe. So this is history. These are facts, right? The explanation of the facts are, as they say in the real world, neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, the Rebbe was never in the Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab passed away. The Friedrich Rebbe became a Rebbe. It's not a secret that Rebbe Leivik was not exactly the Friedrich Rebbe's chassid. He recognized that the Friedrich Rebbe was the Rebbe, and he worked with him, and the only honor from Mesiras Nefesh. They were cousins, and they were mechutanim. But most people will tell you that the Rebbe's father and the Friedrich Rebbe was not a chassid Rebbe relationship. But the Rebbe went to Rostov. He did go to the Friedrich Rebbe. Now, It's very, very difficult to know why he went. Did he go first for a shidduch and then meet chassidus, or did he go first for chassidus and then earn a shidduch? I would like to believe, and there's no way to prove this for sure, that the Rebbe wanted a staff because he wanted a Rebbe. The Rebbe is our Rebbe. The Rebbe was a giant of giants, and the Rebbe was 19 and a half. When he met the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe was 20 and a half. He was 20 years old, 20 and a half. He came for Sukkot Tafresh Pegimel the first time to the Rebbe Rayatz. He spent Sukkot, and the Rebbe Rayatz Friedrich was very makar of him. He put him behind. He stood behind the Friedrich Rebbe by Fabrenganish. Friedrich was makar of him. And during that year, he met the Rebbe Chayim Althaus, and they courted. The Rebbe was 20 and a half, and then 21. So the Rebbetzin was 21 and a half, and then 22 when they met. They were young. The wedding wouldn't happen for another 6 years. But initially they met in 1923, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin met. And we know this from letters, which are now in print. And the Friedrich Rebbe writes to his wife, to his daughter, to the Rebbe Chayim Althaus. And the letter written from the summertime, from Tammuz, he says, we spent a week together, he writes. The Friedrich Rebbe writes in the letter, this week I diligently studied the Torah of Mendel. Torah's Mendel. And he writes, I think I understand them a little. Friedrich Rebbe writes, I think I understand them a little. We spent the whole week together, the three of them. That means the Friedrich Rebbe and the Rebbe and the Rashag. And every day they walked for a few hours and they talked. The Friedrich Rebbe writes to his daughter, the way our home operates, the way our house is, he never saw such a house. The Friedrich Rebbe, if Rebbetzin Chana would have seen that letter, she probably would have taken issue. But that's what he writes. The way our house operates, I'm assuming it means how peaceful and loving and open it was. He's never seen such a home. And he writes, his feelings are completely different than they were 6 months ago. So this tells us that 6 months before he had visited another time, and that it was uncomfortable. We know from sources, and again, I don't know how reliable, but Bet 11 brings it down, that the Rebbe was in Rostov a second time in the winter. He came for Sukkot, came again in the winter, and by Hashgacha Pratis, and this is more than Hashgacha Pratis, this is Hashgacha Pratis, the two Shabbos the Rebbe was in Rostov that winter, the Friedrich Rebbe said two Maimorim that are word for word, the Maimer Basi Legani from Tafshin Yud. Wort in word, word for word. The two Shabbos, the second time the Rebbe met the Friedrich Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe said two Maimorim, Pashas Boyim, Pashas Beshalach. The first Shabbos said the 10 Perakim, which by us divided into two Maimorim. The second Shabbos said the second 10 Perakim, which is again by us divided up into two Maimorim. And it's word for word Maimorim that 27 years later the Rebbe Rayatz would give out for Yom Mistalkusei. And it's compelling. It's almost disturbing how precise this is. So the Shidduch was introduced early. And a lot of people came with the Shidduch. There's an old English expression, success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan. The Rebbe's Shidduch apparently was a success because there's 1 million people they credit for the Shidduch. One of the people who deserved some of the credit was Rebbe Eli Chayim Althaus, who was a big chassid. He was a Nikolayev. Our Rebbe was born in Nikolai. Our Rebbe's grandfather, Rebbe Tzirchane, was the daughter of the Nikolayev Rav. Reb Leivik spent 7 years after his chasana, or more, 10 years in Nikolayev. The Rebbe spent his 7 formative years, 7 early years of the Rebbe's life. The Rebbe lived in Nikolayev. Rebbe Chaim knew him from then, Rebbe Chaim knew him from later, and he came to the Friedrich Rebbe with the idea. Apparently he introduced the Rebbe to the Friedrich Rebbe. And then the trouble started. I don't know what the trouble is. Again, the shmua is that the Rebbe's father was an issue, there won't be any children. And there's all kinds of stories about what happened consequent to that, subsequent to that. One of them is that the Rebbe said to his own father, the Rebbe said to his father, oh, but the Rebbe veist das. You're saying that this is not a good shidduch, there won't be children. The Rebbe knows what you know. If you know it, the Friedrich Rebbe for sure knows it. And the Friedrich Rebbe nevertheless wants the shidduch. No? So if the Rebbe wants the shidduch, it's mustama a good thing. The Rebbe was partially arguing with his father. The real truth is, and I think this has been confirmed, is that the Rebbe's Shatchen was the Rebbe Rashab. Not the Friedrich Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab had said to the Friedrich Rebbe, when obviously B'chaim Chiyasab al Mahdain, wegen der mittelste darf man trachten wegen eine von Levi Gezim. The Friedrich Rebbe had 3 daughters. The oldest daughter married the Rashab, Gerari, and the Rebbe Rashab said to the Friedrich Rebbe, the middle daughter you should think about one of Levi's sons. understand that Leivik had 3 sons. The Rebbe was the oldest, and he was a year younger than the Rebbe Chayim Mushka. So exactly who was going to marry the Rebbe Chayim Mushka? You understand? The Rebbe was a year younger than her. So the Rebbe Rashab was involved in making the Rebbe Shidduch. It's also known, I think this is also considered a fact, that after Sheva Brachas, in Tafresh Beitas, when the Rebbe finally got married, the Rebbe Rayat sent a telegram asking a chassid to go to Rostov, go to his father's teen in Rostov, and to say, Dein Rotzen hat sich ausgeführt. What you wanted, we carried through. The Rebbe Rashab was the one who originally proposed the Shidduch, but the Rebbe Chayim Mushka, he called her the mittelste Tochter, the middle daughter, and the Rebbe, the Leivik's son, the Rebbe. The Rebbe Zog is an our Rebbe. So again, all the pratim are hard to know, but it took 5 years for them to get married. It took a very long time for them to get married. And there's a couple of very interesting episodes that happened intermittently during that time that are printed, that are known. If they weren't known, I wouldn't know them. And even though I make up stories all the time, of course, but I try to have a source for stories that I make up. This is printed in the Sikha. The Rebbe was standing next to his brother Label behind the Previous Rebbe. The two of them were standing behind the Previous Rebbe together. Rebbe Eli Chayim Althaus was at the Fabrengen. Rebbe Chayim Althaus was considered a big chassid. He was very chashiv a chassid. So Rebbe Eli Chayim leans forward and he says to the Previous Rebbe, pointing at the Rebbe, a chassid, take him as a chassid for your daughter. So the Previous Rebbe put out his hands like this here, and he says, Mi yitain. I wish. Mi yitain. Halavai. The Rebbe put out his hands. The Previous Rebbe wanted the Shidduch, and the Shidduch was slow in coming. It was complicated. The Shidduch was complicated, yeah. Apparently. It's very difficult to answer that question. This I will tell you. That the night that the Previous Rebbe was arrested, so the way the story is known is that the Rebbe was walking towards the house. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The Rebbe's Chayim Mushka opened up the window. The Rebbe's Kala opened up the window, and she shouted, Shneir son mir haben guest. Shneir son we have guest. So the Rebbe turned around, and he ran to the different Chassidim who had the documents had to be destroyed, Chaim Lieberman and Chanya Marazov, to destroy the incriminating evidence. But I believe that the beginning of the story was that they were taking a walk. And they saw all the lights were on in the house, and the Rebbetzin said, this is not. So she said, wait, I'll go in myself. And the Rebbe, Zamaduchman once got by Fabrengen, Yud Tammuz, and he was shikir. He said, if not for the Rebbe, there would not have been Yud Tammuz, our Rebbe. And the Rebbe turned to him and he said to him, Noch nish gekommen the Zeit zum Megala sein. The time to reveal that has not yet come. And there's nobody to tell the story. There's a story that we don't know. How the Rebbe saved the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. But that night, the Rebbe ran away. He didn't come into the house. And he did what he had to do. He went to the people who had the documents. Later that night, they were both arrested. But they managed to destroy all the incriminating evidence intermittently because the Rebbe came and warned them that they had been by the Frierdiker Rebbe to arrest him. Anyway, the Frierdiker Rebbe leaves Russia after going to jail and coming out of jail. We all know that story. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, so did the Rebbe. And there's a story connected to that as well. When the Rebbe wanted to leave Russia, the Frierdiker Rebbe was leaving Russia. So Koydem Kol, he was not thrilled to leave Russia. The Frierdiker Rebbe was not thrilled to leave. The Frierdiker Rebbe wasn't happy with leaving Russia. He left Russia because he had no choice. He always felt that his home was Russia, and his Hasidim were the Russians, not the Polish and not the Americans. But the Eibishter Gefiert, the Eibishter led him, but he wasn't happy to go. And he made all kinds of conditions. Amongst the conditions were that he's taking along all of his Svarim, all of his library, which was the whole politics, but they agreed. And the other condition was that he could take his entire family, and they agreed to that too. So he made a list of his family members: his wife, his mother, his wife, his daughters, his grandson, his son-in-law, his grandson, and his son-in-law to be. So the Russian government told him, the Frierdiker Rebbe, an Eidim kemeshafan anandere. A son-in-law to be is okay. Let him stay in Russia. You'll break the shidduch. He'll marry somebody else. So then the story goes that the Frierdiker Rebbe said to the Russians, I'm not getting such a son-in-law. I'm not getting any place. Yeah. So we don't know for sure whether this story ended with the Russian government giving the Rebbe permission to leave on the Frierdiker Rebbe's passport or not. I suspect that they didn't. The government said not letting go. Our Rebbe was a chevreman first class. You don't need me to tell you how big a chevreman the Rebbe is. And he understood the Soviets well. The Rebbe used to speak about, when you want to get something done with the Russians, do it quietly. Here in America, he would scream about that. The Rebbe knew what he was talking about. The bottom line is, the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia right after Sukkot. So did the Rebbe. And there's a story. The Rebbe got himself out of Russia. Again, I don't know if he left with the Frierdiker Rebbe's passport or not, but almost at the same time the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, so did the Rebbe. The difference was this. The Frierdiker Rebbe was living in Leningrad. I don't know if you know the map, but Leningrad is up here to the top. I was in Leningrad more than 30 years ago. If you go to certain parts of Leningrad, there's an ocean. And you could literally see Finland. You could see it with your eyes. You could see another country. That's how small the estuary is, the enclave, the little piece of bay, of ocean that separates Leningrad from Finland. So the Rebbe left from Leningrad. He took a train. He went straight. He went into Finland, I'm assuming, and then he went west from there. The Rebbe went home for Yom Tov. The Rebbe's parents lived in Yekaterinoslavl, in Petrovsk. You know what that is? That's 1,000 miles south or more. It's in the Ukraine, on the river Dnieper. It's very far. So the Rebbe left, the Frierdiker Rebbe left from the very top of Russia. The Rebbe left from the bottom of Russia. He stayed that Tishrei with his parents, and it was a very hard to get Tishrei. The Rebbe's father and the Rebbe and his mother knew that this was a serious goodbye, and of course, as it proved to be, he would never see his father again. Of course, his mother he would see some 20 years later, but his father was never zeicher to see again. And they both understood that there was a realistic possibility. This was a goodbye for good. These are two people, these are gedolim. Big people, when they love big. If you read the Rebbe's father's letters of Leivik, he writes like his letters are so full of love. I mean, your grandmother doesn't write such loving letters. Mamish, the Rebbe's father, his letters are oozing. The love that he feels to the Rebbe and to the Rebbe Chayim is it's pouring out of every word. You could feel how much he loved them, and he longed for them. So that Tishrei was a very important Tishrei, very emotional, and the Rebbe spent it with his father. That Simchas Torah, they danced non-stop. The next morning the Rebbe left. When the Rebbe left, his parents got on the train, and they accompanied him. Reb Leivik went a few stops, and he said his goodbyes, and he got off. The Rebbetzin Chana traveled with the Rebbe till the Finnish border, all the way till the top of Russia. She went all the way as far as she could go, and then she went back. Parenthetically, I forgot a story which I think could tie in a little bit to this mindset. There are a lot of stories about the Rebbe. You don't need me to tell you, there's a lot of stories about the Rebbe. And like they say about the Baal Shem Tov, if you believe them all, you're a fool. If you don't believe they could have happened, you're a heretic. That certainly applies to the Rebbe. But some stories are true. How come we know they're true? Because they were told by the Rebbe's own mother. The Rebbetzin Chana lived in New York until 1964. She talked about the Rebbe. There was a Jewish writer, a Yiddish writer, who lived in New York. He came from the Babachek Chassidim. He didn't have a beard. He was a bigger chassid than a lot of people with Gleis Abed. His name was Nissen Gordon, He was the oldest of the Gordon brothers. And his pen name was Nun ben Yochanan. Nissen ben Yosef, Yochanan Gordon. Nun ben Yochanan, Nissen Gordon did an 11-part series on the Zibit of Lubavitcher Rebbe. They printed in the old Yiddish Haim. And if anybody wants, send me an email. I think I have them on my computer. I'll send you a PDF from the Ganze Meise.
It's Yiddish?
It's Yiddish. It was never translated into English as far as I know. The Zibit of Lubavitcher Rebbe Shlita. And these articles came out when the Rebbe's mother was still alive, in the late 50s, early 60s. He interviewed the Rebbe's mother, and the stories in those articles are very true. And it's really the best source of good material of the Rebbe's early life, of which we know very little, is what she told Nissen Gordon. I understand that the Rebbe wasn't so thrilled with it, but the Rebbe let it through. One of the stories is that the Rebbe's bar mitzvah was from a Thursday evening till Shabbos. So there's two parts, and I hope I'm repeating it correctly. I mean, I read this story before I got married. Okay, I'm married 31 years, so I have the articles, but I never looked at them again. I took the Yiddish Haim, I copied out those 11 articles, and I made them into one PDF. I have them someplace on my computer. If you'll send me an email, I can find them. I'll be happy to. It's my pleasure to share. I have them in one folder. We'll just print them out, yeah? But one of the stories was that the Rebbe's bar mitzvah was Thursday night. So the men were in one room, the women were in another. Remember, they made the bar mitzvah in their apartment. They had already moved to Yekaterinoslavl, but they had a very, very big apartment. They had a gigantic apartment. After the Soviets took over, they took the apartment and split it in half, and the apartment became very small. But they took the apartment in Yekaterinoslavl, they took a gigantic apartment, So there was enough room for everybody. There had hundreds of guests. The men were in one part of the house, and the women were in another part of the house. The Rebbe said his Torah, his drasha, whatever it was, a maimitz, a nigal was. When the Rebbe finished, this was Thursday evening, the Rebbe started to cry. And he cried so heavily, he was a 13-year-old, that the entire room cried with him. The Rebbe said she was in the other room and she was trying to figure out what's going on. Now there's a shmua, and the Rebbe writes. The Rebbe's father kept on asking the Rebbe for something, beginning from that Thursday. And the Rebbe wouldn't agree. Now the Rebbe's mother could have known what that was, but the way Nun ben Yochanan tells the story, we don't know what the discussion was. But the Rebbe's father wanted something from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wasn't agreeing, was not acquiescing, was not agreeing. Till Motzei Shabbos, from Thursday night to Motzei Shabbos, that's 2 days. Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe finally agreed to what it was that his father was asking him to do. And then that Motzei Shabbos was so freilich, you have no idea. So Nun ben Yochanan speculates, who knows? Maybe the discussion then was already about the Rebbe. But the Rebbe's mother probably had some idea what the discussion was, but she doesn't tell him. She just says that the Rebbe Levi wanted something from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wouldn't agree. They would not agree. And the Rebbe Levi was mafzir. He asked again and again and again over the course of 2 whole days. Motzei Shabbos, finally the Rebbe agreed, and then there was a moedin de kesimcha in the house. Again, I don't know. Jacob and Gordon says, Nissen writes, we don't know what it was, but maybe it was that the Rebbe should, again, at the Bar Mitzvah Yingele, to agree to the Inyan of the Siyas, to be a Rebbe. So, this is just a story that I'm sharing, because you're probably not going to hear it from anybody else. If you send me an email, I'll send you the Yiddish Shehem, and if I've told the story incorrectly, you'll come back tomorrow and tell me what I said wrong. Because I saw the story of it's not the kind of story you forget, this is one of those special stories. Anyway, the Rebbe's mother accompanied the Rebbe all through Russia. And they traveled overnight. To travel from Yekaterinslav to the Finnish border to Leningrad was probably 2 days, maybe 48 hours on the train. Trains don't move that fast. They move faster than cars, but they don't move that fast, especially then. And the Rebbe got up in the morning, stood up, and put on his tefillin. On a Soviet train in 1927. You could get lynched for that. You could get lynched for being a Jew, let alone for putting on tefillin. The Rebbe's mother said, I was filled with fear. The Rebbe made believe he had no idea where he was. He stood up and he put on tefillin. And the Rebbe's mother said, suddenly Russian Goyim got up from their seats and they made a circle around the Rebbe to block that people shouldn't see. And they stood there for the duration of the davening. The entire time that the Rebbe davened, a bunch of Goyim created a mechitza around the Rebbe that nobody should see what the Rebbe was doing until the Rebbe, this is the story, the Rebbe's mother was a witness until the Rebbe finished the davening and he took off his tefillin and he sat down and the Goyim went and sat down. A meise pille ployim mamish. Anyway, the Rebbe of course crosses the Russian border into Finland and then he makes his way west. I think he went into Finland. What's the name of the capital of Finland? Does anybody remember? Helsinki. Very good. And then he made his way west. West means towards Riga, Latvia, where the Friedrich Rebbe was. The Rebbe joined the Friedrich Rebbe in Latvia, and they were planning a wedding. The wedding wouldn't take place for a year. The wedding took place for a whole year. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the wedding didn't take place. One of the reasons that we know is that the Rebbe's parents were hoping to come to the wedding, and they kept on delaying it because they were trying to ask for a visa to leave for a visit to Latvia, and the Russians wouldn't give them that permission. And when it was clear that it wasn't going to happen, they made the wedding, but that took a long time. There's also evidence that there was still trouble. The Rebbe's father and the Friedrich Rebbe were still at odds about certain things when they gave to the Rebbe. And this delayed the chasna. Again, there's things that I've heard that I'm not repeating. That even after the Rebbe had left Russia, there was still some discussion that maybe the shidduch would be broken for this reason, which we're not going to get into at all. And then the last reason was, there was no money. The Friedrich Rebbe wanted the Rebbe's wedding to be the grandest event in all of Europe. And it was. And he had no money. A Yid in Eretz Yisrael, a big chassid, his name is Avraham Parish, he was a poor Jew, was walking on an old train track, old British train track, someplace in Eretz Yisrael, and he came across a bag of gold coins that was worth then thousands and thousands of dollars. He took the bag, he went straight to the bank, didn't even go home. And he asked how much each one of these coins worth. They gave him a price. He liquidated all of that gold into cash, and he wired the last dime to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Didn't take for himself a penny. And Chassidim told him, "You idiot! You're such a poor person. You could have kept 5%. And most people give 10%, 20%. He gave the Rebbe 100%." And they told him, "Huh? Rabbi Avram Parish. There's probably grandchildren of him in this room. He was a big chassid, and he had a great mishpacha. The Wolves from Etisol were his descendants. Rabbi Ephraim Wolf was his son-in-law. He was a very big mukusha. That was his thing. It was a very hard to get chassid, a big mukusha. And people told him what kind of fool he was, and he says, "No, I wish I was a bigger fool. I'd be a bigger chassid." Something to that effect. That money made the Rebbe's chassid. You imagine this chus? A yid could have made himself rich. He sent the money to Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker made the chassid that he wanted to make for the Rebbe. But it took more than a year. Now, of course, technically what happened was the Frierdiker Rebbe was given immigration rights in Riga. The Latvian government allowed the Frierdiker Rebbe to live there. And of course, there's a Mishpachas Dubav, I'm related to them, that they have in their family a very interesting little detail of the story. That when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to Latvia, he needed a job. He needed a shul. Rabbi Yitzchak Dubav Alav Shalom was a rav in a shul in Riga. He gave the Frierdiker Rebbe his rabbonos. He moved to England, and it saved his life because the Nazis never occupied England. So he was able to survive. And the Frierdiker Rebbe got the rabbonos, became a rav in a shul, was a rabbi in a shul in Latvia, which was a modern country, a Western country. And the Rebbe was there, along with there were 6 members of the family. 6 members of the family. The Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbe's daughters, the Rebbe's son, the Rebbe's grandson. And the Latvian government would not allow the Rebbe to stay. They didn't give him rights to stay. So by Adar of that year, by February or March of, you're talking now 1928, the Rebbe was forced to leave Latvia and go to Germany. Why to Germany? Again, this is all the Das Tachten, the Das Elyonim, Ich Nishka Elyid. They went to school. By going to school, he was given a student visa.
Only the Rebbe was not
Right, he wasn't a member of the family. This is the story that I told you before, that the Russians only let 6 people on the visa. The Rebbe, I'm assuming he got out on his own way, but the Latvian government said to the Rebbe, "You are not a member of the family. We never gave you the immigration permit, the immigration exception that they gave the Frierdiker Rebbe." The Rebbe Chadum was a big Lubavitcher chassid. He was a member of the parliament. He got the Frierdiker Rebbe out of Russia, and he got his government to agree to take the Frierdiker Rebbe. But not all the Lubavitcher chassidim in the world, you understand? So the Rebbe had to move to Berlin. And he lived in Berlin for a year, till the Chassanet. I believe that at some point he was joined by his brother. Leibel also left Russia, and for a short period they were roommates. In other words, when the Rebbe got married, obviously Leibel had to go take a different apartment, but while the Rebbe was still single, I believe his brother Leibel joined him and they shared an apartment, which l'cha'oira means that Rebbe's brother Leibel was at the Rebbe's wedding, but I'm not 100% sure about this. This I do know, that there was a chassid by the name of Zelig Slonim. Zelig Slonim was a Slonim. He was a cousin of the Rebbe's. He was a Mitlav Zanemikum. Zelig Slonim was a very big chassid. I heard from a shliach once, he was the first Mader and Shliach. He was a Mader and Shliach by the Frierdiker Rebbe. Zelig Slonim was an Israeli Jew, learned in Lubavitch, who went in and out of countries like you go in and out of classrooms. And he met the Rebbe in Berlin. And he said to the Rebbe, "I really want to be at the Chassaneh, but I can't get a visa." He was an Israeli. Israel was Palestine. It was British. After World War I, it was the British. So the Rebbe went with him to the immigration office. He tells the story. The Rebbe went with me to help me get papers. I should be able to go to his Chassaneh. That's very personal. Zelig Slonim. The Rebbe was in Berlin. He was in Berlin. And he was by the Rebbe's Chassaneh. He sent the Rebbe a gift. They had a very special relationship. And then when the Rebbe became a Rebbe, he was the Rebbe's Chassid without any pshara. Anyway, I told you everything but the story, right? What did I tell you? All the preliminary stuff. So as I always do, Seminary Aleph 2, my 2 to 3 o'clock period is going to be the hemshech of this Maaseh. And I'd be really, really delighted to send all of you all 3 parts. If you're so inclined, I will see you tomorrow.